Amen. So morning, everybody. My name's Trev. I'm the lead pastor and vicar here. If you've not met me, it's great to see you all this morning. I've got the privilege of continuing on with our theme, which is dwelling place, looking at Psalm 23, and we're going through like the whole psalm and taking it verse by verse to look at what are the things that we can learn from this. And actually, every verse in this psalm has a new way of understanding how God connects with us. And so there's kind of a list of those things that we've got. Like in the first verse, we're looking at how God provides, and then it's restores and guides. We talked about last week as James Brumwell preached. Today we're looking at comforts, and next week it then be the whole psalm because it's worship for everyone, but then protects and welcomes. So every verse has some rich depth to it around how God connects with us and how our relationship with him unfolds and develops as we get to know more of him. But today we're looking at verse 4, and we're going to go through the whole psalm so that we know it in context. If you've got your Bible, you can turn to it there. It should be on the screens, but if technology fails, we'll have the paper ones as backup. So I'm going to read this psalm out just so we know the context of what we're doing. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. An amazing psalm full of so much depth. And today we're focusing on comfort and how we see what God does as he comforts us. So I wonder whether we might read this verse out loud together so that we're engaged with this and we're also involved in it. So let's read the verse 4 out together. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, this is an amazing verse. I love this verse. It speaks about what life is like and how sometimes, we feel like we end up in these dark places or like a valley or a difficult time or a season in our life which we're really struggling with. But it gives us hope as well. So we're going to delve into a little bit about what that looks like in our lives and how we can connect with God even in those darkest moments. But it's speaking a bit about fear. And we might have like big fears. Who's got might have phobias of different things? Like anyone scared of spiders? A few people maybe. Heights? Anyone scared of heights? Yeah, a few more people. Lots of different things that we might have phobias about or fears about. But there's also the little things as well, like a day in the life of Trev. Like this morning, I feared that I might not wake up to my alarm, and then I would oversleep, and then I'd suddenly turn up really late. Or I might, part of what that means is that I'm fearing that I'm being late, because I can't stand being late. There's a bit of a fear in me, which is from my parents, basically. Well, my mum, mostly. Blame her. I'm just going to name it. She's actually on the live stream. Hey. Thanks for joining us. She's probably switched off now. But like we would much rather be like 4 hours early than 2 minutes late. That's what our household growing up was like. So I've got this kind of inbuilt fear of being late. So this morning that was part of it. Or I also have this fear of like I might forget something. Like my brain isn't what it used to be. And so I kind of get here and I go, have I got everything? I've remembered everything. And like, I've a little bit of fear about that. Another fear that I have is that when I'm talking to someone, I'll forget their name, and then I'll be like trying to think of it, and then actually forget to listen to what they're saying, and then they've said something to me, and I'm like, I don't know what you've said, I can't remember your name, it's really awkward, and I go, I actually need to sort those chairs out, they're really wonky. So if you ever see me doing that, that's probably because I've forgotten everything that's just happened. So there's loads of little fears that bring up me. Another one is that maybe I've got something on my face, like a little bit of toothpaste, no one tells me, and I get home, and at night I go, hang on a minute, oh my gosh, I've had this on my face the entire day, and everyone's been like a bit of side-eye looking at me. So there's all these little fears that come up. There are bigger fears as well, like I've got a back condition, which means actually the cold is nasty, so I fear that being in church might make my back feel bad, and then I fear like, I'm going to sleep for the rest of the day, and it's not going to be a bit of a waste of a day. There's all these different things, and so life can feel like it's kind of full of fears. Like everyday existence can sometimes feel like there's worries and anxieties and fears that kind of crop up everywhere. Like even small things to like some of the bigger things. And then other times, sometimes we find a fear that we didn't know we had. And I watch a few different videos kind of on social media, and some of the videos that come up is like new fear unlocked. I don't know if anyone's seen those videos. So they show a video of something and everyone's like, oh my gosh, didn't know that existed, and now we're like terrified of that. One of the things, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's about my friend. I won't use his real name because James wouldn't want me to, so my friend James Whitney, that is his real name, his mum bought a yucca plant. Anyone know what a yucca plant is? I'll show you a picture in case you can't remember what it is. There was kind of like this craze of having these kind of like semi kind of palm tree plants indoors. I had several of these. Some of them did really well, some of them died, but gave them a best. And James's mum bought a yucca plant. It was great. It was quite a nice big one, and he had it in their living room. Over the next few days, they started finding this weird scratching noise. And they were like, I don't know what this scratching noise is. And they were looking around everywhere, couldn't locate it. And then they started finding, actually, the scratching noise seemed to emanate from the plant or the plant pot. And they were like, this is a bit weird. Like it's a bit of a scratchy noise coming from the yucca plant we just bought. Didn't know what to do about it. So they went back to the garden centre, and James's mum went in and said, look, I've just bought a yucca plant from here. It's making scratching noises. Is it supposed to do that? The guy's face dropped at this point, apparently, and then said, is anyone else in the house? You need to leave the house now. And they were like, I don't know what is going on at this point. And then they sent around this team of people. But apparently, tarantulas can nest inside yucca plants. And so what had happened was a mummy tarantula had gone and made a nest inside the trunk of the tree. And the scratching noise is when all the baby tarantulas want to come out and play. And so if they hadn't noticed it, they would have found a lot of baby tarantulas all around the house, but also the mummy tarantula doesn't like anyone messing around with a baby, so it gets a bit ferocious and might bite. So that was why it was quite scary, and I had no idea. And so I would listen to my yucca plants every night after that. Anything? No, nothing at all. But do you know what? That unlocked a new fear. I didn't know that I should be scared of my plants. I did after that, thanks James Whitney's mum. And it was just this bizarre kind of thing, this bizarre story. But sometimes these kind of fears come out of nowhere and they get unlocked. And we didn't know we had to be scared of plants. But suddenly now we're scared of yucca plants. And I advise you all to go home and listen to your plants. That's the end of the talk, thanks. It's not a prayer point, but maybe it is. But fear is part of the fallen world. We just need to name that as we start, as we're thinking about how God comforts us and thinking about the fears that we might have. Actually, fear is part of the fallen world. It's not how God intended things to be. And so actually, when we trace back right to the beginning of the Bible, when we look at Genesis, we find that their fear started in the garden, and actually we created fear in that place. So when Adam and Eve were in the garden and God was walking with them, everything was hunky-dory, and then the serpent tempted Eve. By the way, Adam was next to her, so you can't just say the woman did it. It was Adam going, yeah, no, you go, love, it'll be fine. You have the apple first. They were both involved in this. So this kind of analogy of human nature is that we messed up. And so when we as people turn away from God, we created fear. In Genesis, it talks like this. It said that at the beginning, when they were created, they felt no shame. They were naked, but they felt no shame. But after they had sinned, they said this, I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. There's a sense of shame and a sense of a fear of punishment or fear of consequence. And so we created fear as we turned away from God. And so right back at the beginning of creation, right back in the garden, the first garden, fear was created. And a brokenness in relationship with God was created. But then when we skip right to the other end of the Bible and we go to Revelation, we find a different story about how God destroys fear. And it says in Revelation 21, it says this, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The old order being how things were had been broken. So the new thing has happened. So Steve preached about how like God restores things. So actually the whole earth is going to be restored into something new. And it's not just something new, but it's almost like there's the original creation where God was walking with us and there was no fear, there was no death, no mourning, no crying. And we created that, and sin crept into the world, and then we got destroyed. And then in the end, when we meet Revelation, we find that all of those things will be destroyed and how the world will be renewed and restored again, and all things are good. But we're not at that point yet. We are here. We're in between the two gardens. There's a garden at the beginning of the story of the Bible with Genesis where fear was created. But then there's also a story about a tree and it being planted with river and how its leaves are for the healing of the nation. And that's in this garden. In Revelation, God destroys fear. But we are in between the two gardens. We're in between the two trees that were mentioned in Genesis and Revelation. So our time is the now, but also the not yet. We know that God has already sent Jesus to win over death and conquer everything, that every sin that we might do, every sin we might think, and all our actions, everything that we do which separates us from God is going to get cleansed because of what Jesus has already done. And so the victory is won right now. But yet we also know that we live in this broken, fallen world where not everything is as it should be. We've heard testimony today about the things that shouldn't be that way. And actually, there's so many things that we see in the world around us, the injustice, where we see pain and suffering and hurt and fear that is all around us. And this is because we live in the fallen world. Our reality is the fallen nature and the world around us. But it's not going to stay that way, thank God. Thank you, God, that it's not going to stay that way. It's going to be different. And so our future holds hope, and it holds a destination where actually we'll become part of this restored earth. And actually all things will be then praising God. And some of our worship this morning has just been amazing, and kind of a glimpse of what it looks like to be praising God in heaven, where the angels are there and everybody, all nations and tribes, and everybody's coming together to worship God. And it's the most multicultural, inclusive place that you can imagine, because everybody gets to be in the presence of God and to worship him. Now, that's a hope that I'm looking forward to. Now, that's a good destination to go to. But it also means that the kingdom breaks in the here and now. That we see glimpses of hope, where we hear stories of people being healed, or people gaining peace when they shouldn't have, when they feel like everything is going wrong, yet have an inner peace, where we see God interrupting our lives and transforming injustice into good, where we see the stories of others where things look like they were traveling one direction, but God turns it into something else. This is the story of the kingdom breaking in, of the now and the not yet of the kingdom. And that's where we are. We are right stuck in the middle of that. But God loves us so much that he sent his only son to die in our place, that Jesus died for each one of us so that we could come back to relationship with him. In 1 John, he writes about this, about what love looks like. And he said that actually there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Like the love that God has for each one of us drives out the fears that we might have. And so how do we live now? Like in the now and the not yet, how do we live knowing that sometimes we have fears and anxieties and worries? How do we live well in this time when actually fear and everything has been brought into the world, but we know that we're not yet at the place where it's all gone? How can we live now in today? But we're going to go back to the verse 4 of Psalm 23, and let's read that again. And this is what it says: I will fear no evil. So there is no fear needed now because you are with me. And this is talking about God is with us. And so actually that is the significant part that we need to remember. That fear doesn't need to exist around us or in us because we know that God is with us. And it goes on to say, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, when you look at that face value, you think, well, the first bit I kind of understand, the second bit, a bit weird. Don't understand rod and staff, don't really understand what we're talking about. This is like an analogy of the shepherd bit. So at the beginning of the Psalm 23, it talks about the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. And so when we think about the shepherd analogy, it kind of starts to make a bit more sense. So in this psalm, David, who wrote it, used to be a shepherd. So he's talking about his own experience of what a shepherd does, what a good shepherd might do. And so he's talking about the tools that he might have used. So a rod and a staff are those things. But there's a quote by this guy called Philip Keller. He had parents who were missionaries in Kenya, so he grew up kind of knowing what it looked like to be out in the missionary journey. And he says this: it's no accident that God has chosen to call us sheep. The behavior of sheep and human beings is similar in many ways. Our mass mind, or our mob instincts, our fears, timidity, our stubbornness, and stupidity. Now, he's talking about knowing what sheep look like, but also knowing what humankind looks like. Now, a lot of the videos I've seen on like YouTube and stuff, I definitely recognize the stupidity bit. That is very clear by what people end up doing to themselves. But this is kind of human nature. Like, there's this sense where sometimes there's this mass effect where, like, if a few people start doing it, then we all think that's the right way of doing things. And that's exactly like sheep. If you've seen any sheep in a field, one starts wandering off, they all go, hang on, you know something, let's go. And someone else is going, hang on, those two are going somewhere, let's go. And then they all just start following each other, and there's this kind of train of sheep just going everywhere. There's a whole field they could use, but nope, they're all hanging out together. So there's this sense where there's this mass mind, or the fears that they might have. I recognize that in our humanness. There are fears, there's this mass instinct that we have. There's also our stubbornness, like that we refuse to, own up when something's made by our own fault, or actually human nature is that we won't back down in any case, regardless of the kind of consequences. And sometimes we're just stupid. Like, I'm just going to own that. Like, I definitely am. Some of the choices I make are stupid. Some of the stuff I do stupid. Some of the things I say stupid. A lot of the stuff that, we see in human nature is echoed in the sense of being sheep. But the shepherd isn't like that. The shepherd is good. The shepherd knows what he's doing. And so in this psalm, when we're talking about sheep, there's this sense that the nature of us is that we're the sheep, Jesus is the shepherd. And so there's this rod and this staff that David is writing about. And so the two things represent different ways that the shepherd would look after the sheep. So the rod is this sense of authority and protection. So they would use the rod to beat off wolves or bears that might come after them, or even robbers who might try and steal the sheep. There's a sense that there's an authority in the rod, this kind of power and protection of it. And the staff is that kind of, the one that we recognize, the one with the big kind of hook. We're grabbing sheep, so there's this sense we're pulling sheep out of trouble, and there's this support and kind of looking after the sheep. That's from the staff represents, but also that the sheep trust in the shepherd, because holding the staff means that actually whatever they do, however stupid the sheep might be, the staff is there, and actually using that means that they can always be with the shepherd. And so the two words that are used in this psalm are really significant for us too. So we're living in the now and the not yet. We're living in this time where fears are still alive with us. But we know that Jesus says that he has authority and he'll protect us, that we can trust in him, that he'll support us. So as we're thinking then about what we do now, part of that is that sometimes we just need to let go. We need to just trust in God. It's so easy for us to want control over our circumstances, over, I'll fix it, I'll get this right, or I'll make sure something happens so that, I can get out of this trouble. But when we find ourselves letting go and saying, okay, God, I know that I'm in a mess. I know that I'm in trouble, and kind of around me is fear and anxiety. What do I do? When we let go and we trust God, it's then that we start to feel even more security in him. So bizarrely, the more we feel like we want to hold on to control, the less we feel that actually we know God with us. And I've definitely seen that in my own life. When I try and solve the problems, actually I don't really sense God as much because I'm so focused on what I want to do. But when I stop and go, actually, God, you need to take over, that's the moment when I know that I feel, God the closest. That's when I feel God drawing nearest to me. In those moments when I let go and I let God be involved. And so comfort, which we're looking at today, when God brings comfort, it's because he has those things. He has this rod and the staff. He can support us, protect us, guide us, be with us, hold us when we need it, if we allow him to do that. Because Jesus has authority over all things, which brings us comfort when we actually let him have authority over all things. When we hold on to things too tightly and say that that's not for you, Jesus. That's when Jesus says, okay, well, you've got it at the moment. When you need me, I can take over. So we need to let God and trust in Jesus. And I joked at the beginning about all the kind of fears and worries that, my day might have about stupid things that I might think about. But there's also those bigger things that we touch on as well. And like, I've talked about it a few times, but I've got a degenerative back issue, and I know that actually that's just going to get worse. And so without God intervening, my back is bad as it is, and I'm in constant pain all day, and I'm on loads of meds, and like even standing up sometimes is a struggle, and walking is difficult sometimes. But when I've let go of all my fears and anxieties about what the future might hold, that's when I've known God draw closest to me. And actually, I've had a huge sense of peace when I've just let go of all my fears about the future, all my worries about what it might look like going forward. And when God takes control, I know I feel more secure in that. When I let my fears go and say, look, I can't control what my life might look like. I can't control my relationships. I can't control any of these things. And I'll let you, God, have it. And when I've done that, God is so gracious, so kind, so gentle, and holds me, comforts me, takes me and leads me and guides me. The more that I trust in God, the more that I know him close with me. And that's not just for me, that's for all of us. Whatever your fears and anxieties might be, when we let go of some of those things, that's when you'll see God break in. That's when you can know God with you even more than you might do at the moment. There's a verse which is in Philippians, and it talks about what we do in these circumstances. So it says, do not be anxious about anything. So actually that's talking about our fears and worries and anxieties, everything that we might be anxious about. So actually none of that kind of matters. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. It's important that we don't forget that God has just given this to us and said, we need to be involved in it. Like, he just is waiting to hold on to these things. And the longer we hold on to it, the less that he can do. And so actually, when we come before him and pray, when we come and say, this is what I'm fearful about, this is what I'm worried about, when we speak those things out, when we own those things and say, it's you, God, you need to do it, that's when we see God break in amazing ways. So I wonder whether we might do that this morning. Like, we've talked a lot about what this psalm might mean and the comfort, but in the reality is like today, you might be facing all sorts of kinds of fears. You might feel like your future is really uncertain. It might be that your relationships you're worried about, or you're fearful about what those things might look like. You may be worried about being alone, or fear what that might look like in your future, or maybe you're trapped because of those things and you feel like you've got nowhere to go. It might be that you're facing unemployment or redundancy, and you might fear what that looks like, what it looks like to not have a job anymore. You might be worried about your past. You might fear those things repeating again. You might also be fearful of like losing control. So often we feel like we need to maintain those things, and actually losing control could feel so fearful. Like actually, if I'm not in control, everything's going to go wrong. You may have any number of fears this morning, but this morning, if we pray and we present them to God, that's when God moves and answers our prayers and steps in. So I wonder whether we do that now. If you want to join, why don't we stand, if we're able to, let's stand together.